And so we begin. It's hard to believe that besides starting Darko, Lord of the Rings is also 20 years old this year. The first one, Fellowship of the Ring. Now, I saw that on Christmas Day, and 2001 was a rough year. I mean, for a lot of people, for obvious reasons, as we were reminded last week. But for myself personally, my wife's grandmother was ill and had passed away, and my brother was in serious need of a heart transplant. And so seeing a movie filled with monsters maybe wasn't the best choice on Christmas Day. It took a while. We didn't really care for it. And then, Jamie's brother kept edging me on. He said, no, you got to see this movie again. It's such a great movie. It's so epic. I said, okay, fine, I'll give it another shot. And sure enough, the Lord of the Rings has become one of the most beloved film trilogies for both of us. And it added a lot of meaning to our lives. And I think it added a lot of meaning to a lot of other people's lives too, because of what everybody was going through during that time period. And thus, it seemed like it'd be a really great time now to talk about movies, especially with the world being the way it is. Something that lets us know where the world, especially where this industry is going. And the industry is changing. Despite using the word distribution, movie studios have always been about containment of content. Before television, the only place you could see a movie was to go to a movie theater, to physically go somewhere. And yes, when television came out in the 1950s, studios initially panicked, but then responded to the threat of television by coming up with CinemaScope, widescreen films that would immerse the audience and offer something television couldn't. They also took full advantage of the abandonment of self-censorship rules from the production code, meaning that films could now present extreme sex and violence, something you couldn't see on broadcast TV at the time, or would want to see at home on the Mary Tyler Moore Show. I don't know if you got the Mary Tyler Moore Show in Japan. It was kind of a thing here in the States back in the 70s. So now the late 20th century brought us the blockbuster, accelerated by filmmakers like George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, which relied heavily on that big opening weekend buzz. Why? Because that's when studios get the most percentage of the profits, which are gradually reduced with each passing week. In the globalized 21st century marketplace, blockbusters also have an advantage because sci-fi, action, adventure, superhero movies loaded with explosions are far less dependent on translation. Dialogue-driven movies require a lot of work and cultural knowledge to adapt, whereas things exploding on screen don't. I mean, pretty much all cultures understand it when something explodes. Or for those who don't know who George Lucas is, in case there's a few of you out there, he made a space movie loosely based on Akira Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress. It's called Star Wars, just in case you never heard of it. Now, today, this device, this is the gatekeeper, your physical window to the internet. And physical location is no longer a factor for so many things. And for a lot of digital natives, a lot of kids, they don't realize there was a world where you had to physically go somewhere or do something to obtain knowledge or services. The phone has changed everything. And in the 2010s, Netflix migrated past its DVD delivery model to streaming content over the internet. And I think Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon, which are the top 3 streaming platforms in Japan, originally saw themselves more like networks or channels. But things changed dramatically when they realized they could be innovative, data-driven production studios. And Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon, the big 3, had a distinct advantage over everyone because the content viewing apps were already in place and they could pick and choose the content they wanted to show, all the while getting real-time data on what people were watching, using that data to make decisions to start making their own stuff. Hence, Netflix started using data to create content. And that's how the American version of House of Cards was made. They knew that people like The Social Network, people like Kevin Spacey films, and, people like the British version of House of Cards. Now, of course, algorithms cannot predict any and all outcomes, such as, huge problems surfacing with the guy playing the main character being kind of a real life weirdo. Now, in America, everyone wants in on the streaming game. Disney Plus, Apple TV, Paramount, HBO Max, you name it. Even still, digital technology is making it virtually impossible to compete by simply limiting access to content. That means the only way to be competitive in today's marketplace is to have the most high quality content available that people are willing to pay for in some form that's owning properties or easily recognizable franchises. The other, and it seems so obvious, is just to make better movies and shows, something more interesting than your competitors. And just drinking water, I'll get to the sake later. And they are. Netflix took the lead in independent filmmaking, successfully boosting its credibility. And Hulu did win Best Picture this year at the Oscars for Nomadland. But part of the problem is the fact that you'll have these beautifully crafted original films placed next to the okay ones, or worse, the really bad ones in that queue of original content. From a marketing perspective, streaming services need to be better at positioning their original properties on the apps themselves. And I think if you introduce sub-brands or catchy categories to manage viewer expectations better, that would be gold. That way, if you're a streaming service and you know you got a subpar movie, I mean, you can put those in sort of a separate branded space than the really good ones. Otherwise, if viewers keep seeing nothing but meh original movies, which a lot of times end up in that top 10 list, you know, they see it all the time, they're just going to tune out. A perfect example of this was when Hulu used to host the Criterion Collection films. Because, and if you don't know what Criterion Collection is, once you enter that area on the application, you know it's going to be mostly international or artsy-fartsy films. Even the brand of Criterion just screams like classic cinema. But now Criterion also has its own streaming channel. And yeah, I'm a subscriber. Where else can I see all those Kurosawa and Ozu films? Now, over the last year, COVID has pushed the studios with streaming apps to start thinking a lot more creatively. Look at how Disney Plus has evolved. The idea of paying extra to see Milan, assuming you already had a subscription, of course, that's how they get you. And that was back when you absolutely couldn't go to a theater. Then Black Widow's simultaneous film and streaming release, for an additional fee, of course, to the recent theatrical only release of Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. And let's just take a moment to process this. The critics and everybody were so surprised it overperformed opening weekend. Why is this a surprise? I mean, weren't you paying attention when Crazy Rich Asians opened in 2018? People still want to go to the movies, especially if you're showing something like a demographic or a culture that people simply don't just get enough of. They don't show enough of in the theaters. And besides all of that, films have some distinct advantages over other media. So, why movies in 2021? Well, first off, movies are a 2 or 3 hour commitment at a time. That's a small investment compared to a television series, which could be anywhere from 10 to 20 episodes, and God knows how many seasons it's going to run. Also, because you only have a couple of hours to tell a story and the potential of a lucrative theatrical release, this means you can afford higher production values. All of this makes films highly digestible and memorable. Now, obviously, we've seen the rise of franchises and the Marvel factor comes into place. But once again, the more time it takes to consume media, the less we retain, the less it seems special. And this is just physics and cognitive science at work. I mean, we can only hold so much information in that bowl of spaghetti between our ears. And now, more on the social side of things. Going to the movies is a communal experience. And I've heard experts dispute this fact using the argument that you're really not interacting with anyone you don't know sitting around you. But that's a very limited view of community and gathering. I guarantee you, if you blindfold and earplug 30 people and push them all into a room, it'll still end up being a shared communal experience, especially when they start bumping into each other. Also, never do that. I'm just saying, you got to put it out there now. A study way back in 1999 showed that the bigger the viewing screen, the more we can become emotionally attached to what we're seeing. I mean, maybe The reason why so many movies are falling into this meh category, I think in Japan it's called zen zen, is that you're just not going to get the same emotional response watching a movie on your phone as you do a big screen. Now, think about A Quiet Place, if you've seen that, as a perfect example of the future of theatrical releases. All horror thrillers thrive on the crowd collectively responding to these well-timed scares on the screen. But the nature of that particular movie itself makes the audience want to stay quiet in the theater because the characters have to stay quiet or they're going to get killed. I mean, John Krasinski got everyone to shut up at the movies and garner a little audience participation. Now, that's an accomplishment. In short, movies that excel at getting people to laugh together, be scared together, be in awe together, cry together, those will drive ticket sales in the next decade. And what they shouldn't rely on is gimmicks. You're learning what gimmicks are. Forget anything that messes with how one actually sees a movie or interferes with the experience. For starters, 3D glasses, they add this obstacle between you and the drama unfolding on the screen, partially because there's something uncomfortable on your face the whole time. Also, you can't really talk to dad because he's got the glasses and looks strange talking to him, you know. And also, depending on how you shot the film, certain cinematic choices may not translate well to 3D. You might have to shoot different versions of a film to play well on both 2D and 3D. 4D has the same problem. For those that don't know what 4D is, it's when you go to the movie and if it's windy on screen, it's windy in the theater. They get these big fans, they go nuts. And if it rains, it also rains on you. If the characters are eating, then you might also smell the food they're eating, which is weird. But here's the rule on 4D. I mean, at least for me, unless the movie is directly related to weather, the gimmick is going to be a distraction. Hence, the only movie I would ever recommend seeing in a 4D theater is Makoto Shinkai's anime, Weathering With You, because it's about a young girl that magically controls the weather. But I'd recommend you see his 2016 film, Your Name First. And you can just see that in 2D. You don't have to get too fancy. Also, maybe it's just me, but I don't get the whole restaurant in the theater gimmick. I mean, where the waiter pesters you several times to refill your cherry Coke while you're watching the movie, then brings the tab just as a serial killer is about to be revealed. And this is so detrimental to the theatrical experience. I don't know if we have those in Japan. If you do, don't go. Don't do it. Stay home and just microwave some food and watch the movie. Don't do that to yourself. I mean, the takeaway here is this: anything that acts as a distraction to the experience of seeing a movie sabotages your most competitive attribute, which is viewers becoming enamored with the content and moved and consumed by the story. Now, moving on, over the last year, studios learned that delaying the release of a film for an extended period of time is very, very expensive. This means more of a focus on lesser risk mid-sized movies for a while, like we were talking about Gattaca. You can make 4 to 6 movies with the same budget as No Time to Die. I mean, sure, you lose the James Bond brand, and I love James Bond. I mean, I admit that. You lose that brand recognition, but a mathematical stats guy like Nicholas Nassim Taleb, he wrote the book, The Black Swan, which has nothing to do with the movie. But he'll tell you it's better to be what he calls anti-fragile and spread out your risk more. Be more risk averse. Now, if we look at the many of the surprise success stories and industry trendsetters from the last 20 years, and in many ways throughout film history, they mostly come from modestly budgeted movies. In short, there's an opening for movies that rely less on being expensive and more on being clever, especially as the resolution gets better and better on screen. Live action stunts, on-screen scares, and shockingly funny cutaways are going to register far more with the audience because it's so stunningly clear. I mean, this is nothing new. Many of the old silent films relied on extremely dangerous stunts to get a reaction from the audience. And just like how the widescreen presentation made the visuals more immersive, we're going to enter into that world again. I mean, especially if the worldwide geopolitical scene continues to deteriorate. This is the sad part of the talk. Populism is on the rise, economies teetering on collapse, supply chains diminishing, and all the experts saying, I don't know what's going to happen. Do you know Frank? Frank doesn't know. Nobody knows. Who's Frank? Worldwide travel is going to become less obtainable or desirable, and God forbid another virus outbreak impossible. You'll want to travel the world virtually. And many people already did this during the pandemic. We saw a rise in learning to speak another language and interest in non-local entertainment, especially the rise of K-dramas, Korean dramas in the US. There are even YouTube channels dedicated to walkthroughs of Japanese towns or cities shown in the highest resolution possible. The days of virtual travel are here. But this is where we have to have the resolution talk. Specifically, how much is too much? Did any of you see the first Hobbit movie in high definition of 48 frames per second a few years back? My brother did. The one who was sick, he's doing great. He's fabulous, by the way. He's wonderful. I love that guy. But besides the fact that he realized this was a bad idea when he went to see this 48 frames per second clarity, because besides that, the clarity of that image reveals that most of the cast is wearing fake ears and noses. But anytime the camera moved, you get motion sickness. A simple rolling transitional camera shot over Hobbiton or the mountains of New Zealand is now a roller coaster ride of terror, which of course has the exact opposite effect that you want on your audience. Now, Ryuto Kondo, who is Hirokazu Koreeda's cinematographer on the brilliant 2018 film Shoplifters, quoted another cinematographer stating color captured on film is memory color, literally meaning that film can express the color which is in our memories. And Koreeda always shoots on 35mm film. And that makes sense. If the resolution is higher, we start to look at the images we're seeing on screen much more analytically. So instead of seeing an entire movie screen as one complete composition, we start focusing on the different areas within the composition itself. Once you kick in that part of the brain, it's harder to be enraptured by the drama on display. In the States, we call this the soap opera effect, if you know what soap operas are. And there is some science to this. Part of the fascination of 19th century impressionistic paintings was that our minds had to fill in the gaps of the blurry images that we were seeing on canvas. Studies have also found that we retain more information from text that's gray printed, that's lighter than normal. Now think about how weird and contradictory that is to our everyday assumptions. Basically, if our brains have to do a little bit of work, it makes that content more engaging. Now films have to adapt. And part of the reason why I see a return to out of control slapstick comedies, maybe even bawdy ones in the near future, the narrative isn't as dependent on audience being swept away by the story. Live action stunt movies, and yes, animations can truly benefit from higher resolutions. That's part of the reason why Tom Cruise keeps jumping from buildings, or he's flying planes, or he's jumping from flying planes. In fact, him and director, I think it was Christopher McQuarrie, if I got his name right, they actually took a moment to warn people about screen resolution and TV settings at the start of one of the recent Mission Impossible Blu-rays. Yeah, it's a thing now. If you have the resolution too high, people will think it's fake. Now, on a side note, when we start to go crazy and approach like 8K resolution, this might be the opportunity to consider shooting live action stage plays with a single camera shot in the back as a viable source of entertainment. It could literally look like you're watching a live stage play in a theater. But in short, higher resolutions mean people interact with the images on screen differently. So if you film in a unique region of the world, it'll feel more like being there. And movies have thrived on this kind of thing since their inception. We're just now at a point where shooting on location is once again a big value add. Just as an example, a comedy drama like 2004 Sideways, or the Japanese remake, Sideways, I believe it's called, set in the dynamic landscapes of wine country, those kinds of stories can be desirable again. Oh, and on a personal note, I recently wrote a screenplay set in Osaka, not just because Chicago and Osaka are foodie-driven sister cities, and we share some things in common. I just wanted to see a film set in Osaka. Because one of the things we have in common is that New York and Tokyo get most of the attention. And what about these smaller cities? What about Louisville or Denver or Salt Lake City? And in Japan, there's Kyoto, Sapporo, Yokohama, Nagoya. I mean, these are underutilized locations, especially in Western cinema. For years, the city of Philadelphia, and I don't remember if it was the city itself or the travel board or whatnot, used Silver Linings Playbook as a way to promote their city. And I think smaller cities are looking for a way to grab attention to themselves and would love to have a popular movie associated with them. Now, Japan is unique in that it has been extremely proactive in cultural engagement with the United States for decades, and it has worked wonders. Just ask those grandparents running around playing Pokemon Go with their grandchildren. For more on how Japan became a cultural superpower, I would highly recommend the book Pure Invention, How Japan's Pop Culture Conquered the World by Matthew Alt. He's a great guy. It's a great book. Check it out. It's fantastic. Besides popular culture, everyone likes Japan. In a recent Gallup survey, 86% of respondents had a positive take on Japan. 86%. The only countries securing higher overall scores were Australia and the United Kingdom. And no, I didn't look up America's score. I thought that might make me depressed. So, make more movies in Japan. And maybe not like that recent Netflix movie, Kate, which I know had to be made by algorithm targeting a specific demographic because it hit every single one of my personal buttons of things I like to see in a movie. Had the girl from Scott Pilgrim doing a John Wick role and bandmaids in it, and they're in Tokyo. But here's the thing, if you're going to go that far and create films that are specifically engineered to an audience, and I know you are with your algorithms, you also need to ensure that it delivers on that must-see trailer promise. Now, Kate could have used a branded category, something like Netflix's avant-garde or art house or action cinema, just to manage expectations. See how that can become useful. See, also, that's part of the problem of algorithms. You might have all of the facts to put together a well-targeted movie, but that doesn't mean you're going to make a good one. I mean, movies are really hard to make, even with all that data. Also, with algorithms and test audiences and heaven help us internet trolls, studios tend to make safer bets, choices that appeal to the widest audience possible, instead of making modest risks that could draw the audience in more, challenge them more, and turn beloved properties into something more. I mean, with Disney Marvel films, I mean, come on, they're always pretty good. And yeah, some of them qualify as great films, but for anyone that loves movies, they always feel a little bit too engineered. And yeah, if you haven't noticed, every Marvel or modern Star Wars movie always closes with this grandiose Seven Samurai style third act battle sequence. Every time. I mean, The Empire Strikes Back, that second Star Wars movie, by putting the big battle at the beginning of the movie, leaving space for the final act, just to have a much more intimate and nuanced standoff between characters where the stakes are far more personal and not about saving the world for the 157th time, it seems almost revolutionary now. Now, algorithms and predictive analytics, decisions made by data, can make it too easy on the audience to digest what they're seeing. Thus, we end up with a lot of pretty good movies, a lot of meh movies, and a very few spectacular ones that move the needle forward. Speaking of movies that are terrible, let's look at the sad history of video game movies in America. It started with 1993 Super Mario Brothers. 2 years later, they released the first Mortal Kombat, which was a financial success, but nobody would even, maybe some would call it a good movie, but it's okay. It's an okay movie. You know, and then we're going to transition into a slideshow presentation if I can pull this off, because you got to keep it entertaining. You've been hearing me talk for 20 minutes. All right, let's see, sharing the screen. I'm going to need some screen sharing capabilities there. Kenichi. We'll wait for that.
Yeah, you can now.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much, Kenichi. All right, guys. I am going to pull up this guy. Sorry, guys, for this little gap. I want to share. Okay, so get out of it. Okay, you guys see my image there? You see a little bit of a Sonic the Hedgehog? All right. So every video game adaptation seems to fall either under the, it's critically or financially like just decimated. And that was until Sonic the Hedgehog. I mean, not bad. And here's the trick. Sonic, and they didn't like make a classic movie. And they didn't make a video game movie either and force all of those unnecessary game mechanics into the story. They made a family film with Jim Carrey from the 1990s. It was ironically around the same time that Sonic Hedgehog was popular. I mean, it's not high art, but it's not a bad film either. And neither was Pokemon Detective Pikachu. Now, Sega just needs to make a film series and like something like Persona 5, which this could upend the industry. Story-wise, it's about a group of lovable teenagers that travel into the projected minds or psyches of corrupt adults, Inception style, in order to make them repent and change their ways and reform society in the process. I mean, who wouldn't want to see a movie like that in the theater in a time like this? And yeah, I wrote a whole synopsis, a ridiculously long synopsis about this because I have way too much time on my hands. Regardless, it's important to get these adaptations right because when we look at the long list of potential narratives from an industry that has now financially surpassed movies in annual sales, it just makes sense. But even with all of that video game content, that's not nearly enough to augment an industry that relies on their audience being aware of an existing brand or franchise. Now, if there was just only a country or a region of the world that has a treasure trove of original content that's, already somewhat pre-tested with audiences and that, oh yeah, we do. Yes, we do. How about that? Japan releases around 200 new anime shows a year, has thousands of shows already completed, not including the endless amounts of manga and books with authors like Haruki Murakami and Banada Yoshimoto. They have numerous novels begging to be adapted. But let's have that adaptation talk now. Why is it that when Hollywood adapts material from Japan, they feel the need to set it in an American setting and strip out all of the things that made it magical in the first place? They want to remake Your Name this way. Why? And why did they do the American remake of Death Note in Seattle? Why was it set in Seattle? Have you ever been to Seattle? Oh no, and I don't have the guy. I don't have what the guy looks like. This guy looks insane. He doesn't look like the guy with the horse, but the guy from Death Note, if you saw him walking around the street with the magical book that when you write the name of someone that they mysteriously died, that would probably be one of the least weird things happening in Seattle this week. And then what? You take a beloved dark property like Tokyo Ghoul and set it in a world populated with people eating zombie-like creatures, but instead, call it like something like Chicago Ghoul, where now these creatures survive by eating cheese fries and all the while complaining about how bad the Bears are doing this season. The Bears, all they need is the better offensive line, and that's that. You got any cheese fries? Cheese fries. Yeah. That's what it's like living in Chicago, for those that don't know. Fun fact, one of my favorite movie conversations I ever heard was 20 years ago. I was working at a video production place, and these two very Chicago guys were having a conversation that I was listening in on. And the one guy says, hey buddy, you see the Gladiators last night? And his friend said, no, man, my wife wouldn't let me go. And then he turned to him and said, yeah, man, I would have been like, see you later, alligator. I'm going to go see the Gladiators. There's a lot to unpack with that conversation. The fact that they actually rhymed alligators with gladiators. Another fun fact, if you're in Chicago, any noun has a duh and add an S to the end of it. Did you see the Top Guns? Yeah. So When can we expect these anime properties to reach our shores? Well, soon, like this November, when the long-awaited Cowboy Bebop hits Netflix, which is one of many anime properties already in production. Regardless, I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. And I honestly feel anime and video game adaptations will be the next big wave as superhero movies become less fashionable. As the geopolitical scene darkens, people are going to want more challenging and realistic content. And this has happened in the recent past. Back to James Bond. Look at the films that went into production after 9/11. 2002's Die Another Day, James Bond, Pierce Brosnan, with its invisible cars and villains with diamonds jammed in their face, looks so antiquated compared to that modest budgeted, tactile, and grounded spy thriller called The Bourne Identity, released that same year. Hence why the James Bond franchise started over with its gritty, like, rough and tumble Casino Royale in 2006. So, what can we take away from all this? Japan already has a high favorability rating, and location shooting will be more of a value add for audiences. There's a wealth of anime, manga, books, and video game material just waiting to be adapted from Japan. And the simple fact that affordable, high-quality entertainment will be in serious demand for streaming services hungry for new product. If the 1950s saw the emergence of a French new wave, the 2020s and 2030s can not only be the rise of a Japanese new wave, but for Japanese entertainment to become fully mainstream here in America, accompanied by a 1970s-like film renaissance here in the States. It's already happening in some ways. Netflix and Hulu both actively pursue and promote anime, even including an anime section as a predominant category when you're searching for stuff. By the way, watch Erased. The animation, it's phenomenal. Korean dramas with catchy soundtracks and high production values have thrived on streaming services. Japanese bands like Baby Metal have performed on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, and although not Japanese, K-pop band BTS currently has 5 albums that have debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, and really fast. I mean, that hasn't happened since the Beatles. But there are some things holding this momentum back. In a 2018 Mark Schilling article for Variety, hope I got his name right, Mark Schilling, about Japan filmmaking, he wrote, in recent years, increasing numbers of filmmakers have redefined low budget to mean next to nothing. That has widened the gap between major Japanese studios' productions and the independent majority. It may also have led to the disappearance of most mid-budget films where Koreeda's 2018 Shoplifters sits, together with many of the companies that once distributed them. And this is crucial. That mid-budget film is exactly the kind of movie that will have the best chance of crossover success. Most studios around the world aren't going to have the capacity to compete with the likes of the Disney Marvel powerhouse. We dinged. If studios in Japan or wherever can create films that can factor in more profits from the West, it would help raise production values and place them in that essential mid-level sweet spot. And it doesn't have to be completely westernized either. I mean, South Korea can be an example of how you can find a nice balance between different sensibilities. In Japan's video game industry, this has already happened. In a recent documentary by Archipel on YouTube, the strategy of creating mid-tier games like Persona 5 that weren't a giant Grand Theft Auto level blockbuster or a tiny indie game has worked out extremely well. And I highly recommend checking that documentary out as well. And if you're a movie theater chain owner, it's time to start treating your service for what it is, a sanctuary for 2 to 3 hours. This is your time to unplug. Make it known. Make it your selling point. Don't just kind of nudge people, maybe nice to turn off your phones. No, this is your space from the rest of this. As we become more secular and mental decompressing is in short supply, the movie theater is one of the few remaining sources of a communal experience that encourages you to stop everything and pay attention to something for a couple hours. Position your marketing to make going to the movies and going to the theater a true experience again. Now, 30 years ago, back in 1991, Kieslowski made The Double Life of Veronique, if you've ever heard of this film. You don't need to know, but all you need to know is that his original vision was to have dozens and dozens of slightly different versions of the film with small changes and edits peppered throughout the movie. I mean, just enough to give the viewer that sensation that, like a dream and a sense of fluidity, something feels very different every time you watched it. Now, at that time, that would have been a near impossible task, technically speaking, of course. Now, with digital editing, it's possible. And with streaming, it's definitely possible. And that's just one of many innovative ideas just waiting to be explored in the future of cinema, whether it be releasing different variations of a film for different regions or even more creative choices than that. And okay, that's a wrap. I invite you all to check out my website, boojazz.com, for my illustrations, philosophies, design work, and to grab a copy of my latest book with Russell Manifestos, Reinventions, and Declarations. There's also access to my comic strip about an alien that runs a coffee shop in, of all places, Seattle. So let's go to questions. I have absolutely no idea how all that went over. I have a lot of respect for people who do talk shows now, because it's you really are in a funnel. Okay, so let's open it up to some questions. Do we have any questions? Okay, go ahead, just chime on in.
Okay. I just want to say that was a pretty interesting speech.
Oh, thank you.
And I don't know too much about movies and cinema, but I was pretty in tune with it. I do like the idea of, well, not the idea. I want to touch on what you said about studios not really taking risks. And I know a big thing for movies and something that really catches my eyes, especially as a person of color, is that a lot of movies don't want to take the risk of, placing more people of color in their films, or even just, making a character a not white person. So if we're talking about like engaging the audience more and making more films with people that, don't resonate exactly with the Western audience, what do you think would be like the first step towards getting studios more comfortable taking those types of risks, and saying, like, if you put this person, or you just diversify the cast a little bit, you're not going to lose money, like people will be invested in it? What do you think would be the first step?
Well, that's a good question, because I don't know, because when you look at the financial aspects of it, it's there. Black Panther did amazing box office. Get Out does amazing box office. I think that it's just like anything. I think when you deal with big corporations, I think that it's a lot of different people. So you have all these great ideas, but everything just sort of gets funneled into groupthink. And I think really what it is that just more people, like, I did this talk just to be another voice, to be like, come on, like, I want to see more minority driven films because I think they're interesting. And I don't need to see something blow up for the 87th time. I want to know more stories. And I think we're heading into that time period. I think that there is an ebb and flow with films. They become very technically involved and very special effects and that level. And then once we all get accustomed to seeing that clarity of those special effects, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, we want something more artistically challenging now. But really, to answer your question, the truth is, I don't know. To me, it's not only, it's a given, it's an obvious choice. And so it's whether it's just systematic racism, which probably is part of it, or whether it's just being blind to just doing things differently, or having a different and a viewpoint. It could be both of those things. So unfortunately I don't have an answer, because to me it's obvious that they should. So I think it's more just all of us and our voices coming out and being like, okay, guys, let's see more stuff. I want to see more movies like Straight Outta Compton. I want to see more movies like Crazy Rich Asians. I want to see more movies like Chang. I actually saw, that was my first time in the theater in 2 years, was to see Shang-Chi. And I'm hoping I'm not mispronouncing. Yeah, I got to see it with a friend of mine he's been sick for a lot of years, and he's hanging in there. So it was nice to have that experience with him again. Sorry, I hope that answers your question a little bit. Thank you. All right. Do we have any other questions? Thoughts,
Well-
comments? Am I completely wrong? What do you guys think?
Part of what you're talking about, I think, is what are called art house films.
Yeah.
And I think that the small screen that we're all watching now definitely lends itself more to that type of movie. So the intimate story, the story that's really more emotional than blowing stuff up, as you say, you know.
Yeah, no. And I think there's never a clear-cut choice, right? Like, for example, like you can have a movie that's like a complete art house movie, and that's going to have its own little niche. But you can also have what you have these mid-budgeted movies that they're interesting, they push the needle forward, but yet they're a wider audience can appreciate them. And a perfect example of this was John Wick when that came out in 2014. I mean, that not only did that just come out and like literally blow everybody away, it changed the way we shot action films. And that was a very modest picture. It was shot really well. I think that, like, when we talk about like the movie Kate, it just didn't, they had all the algorithms, they knew the styling, they had all the data, but really in the end, what made John Wick work was just the action sequences, like the cinematography, Keanu Reeves, all that was extra. That was great. But those well choreographed action sequences is what sold that movie. And that's the thing that I think, once again, you get all this data and you start factoring in all this stuff. You're right. Oh, wait, the obvious choice, a minority cast, the obvious choice, a well shot action sequence. I mean, why have we forgotten how to use the camera to tell a story? I mean, don't we know that if I do a Dutch angle like this, all of a sudden the conversation becomes a little bit more sinister? What's going on? Like, it's amazing to me. I think it's because of the resolution and because there's so much set design becomes so much a part of telling the story, that lighting, cinematography, these are, I want a good zoom every now and then, that realization zoom, and then it comes in there. We just don't see that anymore. And I feel like we're missing something. I think we're going to see it again, though. I think that's coming back. So, any other questions?
I was really, hi, Michael. I was really fascinated when you were talking about resolution and what happens with people's minds, and how when there's more space, it's like there's more room for them to actually engage unconsciously with the film. And I find that fascinating. And then what happens with color? Like when you're talking about that, how when there's, again, when there's space, we have more room to be involved, right?
Right. Well, the two big things is, one is that when you're watching you're watching it on your phone as opposed to being in a theater, like I said, it has been proven you have a better chance of being emotionally engaged with that material. And
Right.
yeah, I think that the more clear, when you start getting those super high resolutions, you have to shoot the film differently. You can't have the camera move. People will get motion sickness. You literally have to think about how you shoot a movie. I think resolution is going to be like one of the key factors. When people talk about, I'm going to make a movie, you're going to say, well, what resolution should I shoot this in, depending on the content of the story? Because if it's really high, you're not going to want to move the camera around much. I know that's the weird thing. And I do miss the use of color. I don't think they use color in movies, and they do a lot. I mean, I grew up on 90s indie films. So I think about films by Warkar Y, like Chungking Express or The Fallen Angels, where he just really blows out the reds and the greens. In fact, it was funny in Shang-Chi, there is a flashback sequence with Tony Chung, I believe is his name. And he was in all those Warkar Y films. And sure enough, I mean, they had it green, and you can tell it was a slight homage. But once again, I think with Disney Marvel, man, I think they should have just blown that out and really made you feel like for a moment you were in a Warkar Y film. They use color to tell the story. But once again, I think that because there's so much information and things are so clear, things are getting kind of lost, I think sometimes you can tell a better story if you're talking to a character and it's like all night and you got like a red light and you're just kind of focused on this person, then you can if they're in this big elaborate setting. You know, once again, using the set and the camera to tell the story. So I don't know if that answered it. I was just kind of thinking, I kind of went
It's
freestyle.
cool. Yeah, you're riffing. It's an interesting discussion for sure. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I found it really interesting, and I'm not a film buff by any means.
Oh, thank you. Well,
So yeah, it was really neat. I learned a lot.
when you try to think about films, and like I'm gonna give you a spoiler alert for every movie you're ever gonna see. I'm warning you all. Films are circular. Russell and I have talked about this. I think you were the one who planted that scene in my head. So if you ever watch a movie and they put something in the first 10 minutes, whether it be, oh, I really like butterflies, or whatever, anything, they'll come back to it at the end of the movie if it's a good movie. And that's because it's a way of showing the progression of the character. And I've seen it almost formulaically done in Marvel movies and Disney movies.
Well, that's like in songwriting. So you have your motif, and it's going to come around, a few times in the course of, say, even one verse. And it allows for people's minds to rest and get used to the repetition, and they kind of like knowing something,
Right.
or knowing what to expect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We like that. It's all peekaboo, isn't it? It's just as we get older, we got to get more elaborate with our, I'm here, I'm not here, it's in some ways it is.
Object constancy.
Right. All right. So any other questions from our audience? It's so good to see everybody here. I know Tash showed up late. We're sorry about that. Well, we'll have a replay. And so if anybody missed any part of this, there'll be I think Kenichi is going to pop this on as for anybody who wants to check this out again. So before we end, because we might do one more fun thing here before we go. I know it's been kind of a long night, but we might do one more fun thing. Any last questions or thoughts? Nothing. Going once, going twice.
Well, I'll
right.
jump in once more.
Okay.
So with the advent of people being able to make movies with something like a phone or something, much smaller cameras, the possibility of much more intimate 1, 2, 3 character films, like say My Dinner with Andre, like those type of movies that people really are art house movies. That's the only way you're gonna see a movie like that back when it came out. And now it's sort of and then they're called cult classics afterwards.
Yeah, it's funny because like I remember being like one of the 5 people in the theater seeing Last Days of Disco, Wilt Stillman's movie from 1980 with my dad. And I obviously didn't do well. You're alone in this theater, but it was just, I remember that experience partially because it was such an empty theater and just being in this big space and just kind of being the 5 people just laughing hysterically at this movie. Yeah, that's one of the things that I think is kind of makes me sad about like a lot of this art house stuff just goes right to like Netflix, is because you do miss even a limited communal experience for these very special films. And I don't know if like an art house film like Cold War or that was on Amazon Prime, or like Our Little Sister, Koreeda's film. Like, I mean, I would love to see those on the big screen, and I'd hope that there one day would be a market for something like this. And so I don't know. I honestly don't have an answer to that one. Unfortunately, usually the answer is probably not good. But it's sometimes you just, if you can't enjoy it on a big screen, you just got to enjoy it at home. So
yeah, and I think too, the way that the pandemic is going to change once people are able to go to the movies again, maybe just feel them, experience them in a whole different way.
I know I did. And I hope too, another thing I think that the theaters can do, and I hope they do this, is like I go back there and it's like, okay, the same old stale popcorn, the same old smelly theater. Like I know in Seattle, they have like a lot of old movie theaters where they really, really do up the place. And maybe they'll have to do this again. I think movie theaters need to be an experience. You think about it, like I made that talk about, we're becoming more secular. So I'm checking my dog in a minute. We're becoming more secular. And because of that, there's not these times in our life where we can be somewhere for just 2 to 3 hours and just watch something and just be present. And movies do that. I mean, I can see how movies almost become a religious experience in some ways. There are a lot of people who register their religion as Jedi. I remember there was a few years ago, they talked about that in the UK, that, oh yeah, I'm a Jedi. Like, I don't think they have magical powers or anything, but I understand the power of cinema. And more importantly, the power of just sitting there watching something for 2 hours. My dog is going out of control. I know. I'm talking on the computer. I might have to grab him in a minute. So, all right. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, it's just interesting. Russell was saying about how different the experience is likely going to be post-COVID. When we can gather together, it's going to be a huge experience in and of itself, just being in a group of people.
I know.
Being in physical proximity.
It was interesting going back. You kind of felt the presence again. And honestly, truth be told, I think when we're past this in a year, I think people are going to want to go to the movies. They're going to want to do things in public spaces again because we missed it. So now, okay, so I think we're going to wrap. Russell, do you want to do one last thing here before we go? And then I'm going to get some food for this boy so he'll behave himself a little bit. Russell, explain what's going to happen.
If we're able to. If we're able to do it, let's do it.
Huh? Come here, buddy. All right. Yeah, I love you too. You too. I have 2 dogs, Linus and Casper. You got to see Casper earlier if you joined in. He rescued him from a laboratory. Spent his first 4 years of his life in a cage. And he's doing much better now. And our other dog, Linus, he's a deaf cattle dog mix that he knows sign language. And I thank Jamie for that. She taught him 50 different signs.
Wow.
All right. So
we're gonna read from
with Culture is Not a Luxury. It's a chapter of our book, and it's just a reminder that we kind of take movies and culture for granted. We shouldn't. It is very important to have a robust culture for society to thrive. And one of the things we wanted to write about was about that. So I don't know if I have any jazz music ready. I might just snap my fingers. I will wear my hat for this. Let's do this.
Okay, you begin, Michael. Take the first 2.
Culture is not a luxury. Art can change lives and save lives. Now, oh, I'm going.
You go ahead.
I'll do the first paragraph. Now, in this historical pandemic moment, while nature has pushed the reset button on humanity, we can gain comfort and joy from movies, books, TV, shows, poetry, in every conceivable form.
The arts entertain us, calm us, enliven us, and touch the core of our being.
This has been true over the course of humanity, and especially true now.
All the artifacts, sculptures, architecture, paintings, poetry, plays, and music handed down to us through the centuries have told us what our global ancestors felt and thought about the world they observed. The history of humanity is known and understood only by the arts and artifacts left behind.
While the value of art and culture is reinforced by our most popular art forms of TV shows, movies, and music, how we consider the role of art in our lives comes back to how they make us feel.
Do you love art? Of course you do. If a movie ever made you lose track of time and you became emotionally invested in the characters' lives, you know the importance of art. If a song fills you with joy or makes you weep, you were touched by the arts.
Art and culture is what gets us through good times and bad. We seek out movies and music to remind us that we are not alone and we are understood and we are part of a collective humanity.
Whether people relate storytelling on a TV show or the hit song on Billboard's Hot 100 to every form of art and culture through the ages doesn't matter. What matters is that artists are still creating paintings, photographers are taking pictures, movie makers are making movies, writers are still writing novels, and songwriters are writing songs.
All art is interrelated, as are all artists. Musicians are called artists, actors are called artists, painters are called artists, and we call on artists to take us out of ourselves and bring us deeper into ourselves. It's a massively wonderful mission, but every artist is up to it.
How many countless hours of inspiration which led to culture-shifting ideas and inventions came from watching a movie, listening to music, or viewing a work of art in a museum or a book? In the same way a doctor spends countless hours learning to be a doctor, an artist learns by countless hours of learning from the past and applying it to the cultural now. After learning what's been done and what's inside of them, they get to bend the rules and create with total freedom in their chosen art form. Otherwise, what's the fun?
Deciding whether a child should learn to be an artist or a doctor isn't an either or decision. Every society must have both. Could we live without music or movies during this time period?
Art gives people ideas, enabling them to grow past boundaries. Art is the dream world present in real time and the reason why we can imagine a better world. Art breaks through algorithms and changes the course of history.
Art touches every part of our lives and shapes us from the time we're small children. Art provides much needed emotional intelligence, beauty, and thoughtfulness in a world driven by over-objectivity and precision for the sake of precision. That's you.
To
You
think the
better rap.
world can get along without creative aspirations and new creations in every form possible is to imagine a bland, uninteresting world no one should be forced to even think about, much less live in.
And that's it. And that's a wrap. I'd like to thank Kenichi from Blink Community for hosting us today. Thank you so much. And thank you all for participating and joining in. Sorry, it was a little bit rocky, a little bit of turbulence in the beginning, but I think it all worked out in the end. Any last thoughts or comments before we go? Kenichi, you want to take us out? What do you got?
Just
Yeah.
thank you, thank you. It was great.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much. I like the vibe you make while you're talking and interacting.
Got to make it entertaining. I mean, come on. I'm just like blah, 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 blah. I got to do something.
Yeah, anyways.
All right.
To everybody.
Thank
All
you.
right, guys. We're calling it a night. Thank you guys so much for coming.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.